Welcome to tonight's talk with Pauline Hill from the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales. Tonight, which is World Wildlife Day, we're going to be hearing about some of the iconic wildlife that makes its home within the Brecon Beacons National Park. So over to you, Pauline.
Good evening, everybody. Well, there's so many choices of species to pick from. I may have included some that people don't think are quite that iconic and left a few others out. I've grouped the species roughly to habitat, working from the highest to the lowest, so from the mountains downwards. It doesn't mean that these species are only found in those habitats, but it's the habitat that they're associated with. So starting with the mountains and moorlands, it's an iconic view of the Brecon Beacons, and specifically Old Red Sandstone to start with. This is acid generally and wetter than limestone. I think Ben's stolen a bit of my thunder on this one, but no worries. This is the red kite, and it's, as you've seen, one of the conservation success stories of recent times, and the emblem of many businesses around the Brecon Beacons, including Powys County Council. It's distinguished by its forked tail and the white spots under its wings here. As Ben said, in the 1960s, only a few pairs remained in mid-Wales, and that was mainly due to egg robbing and illegal poisoning, under the misconception that it preyed on the lambs and other stock. But in fact, it prefers carrion and worms. Add in the fact that they had produced few eggs, it was realised that they would not be able to spread out of Wales without help. And the Kite Committee was formed by interested people. This later became the Welsh Kite Trust, and they formed a group that protected against egg robbers and also provided education. They later got support from the RSPB. From the 1980s, numbers started to increase, and as we've seen, it's now commonly seen throughout the Brecon Beacons. The peregrine falcon is generally much more secretive, preferring cliffs in remote locations. Blink and you might miss it. It's one of the fastest animals on Earth, reaching about 200 miles per hour and stoop to catch prey. This one is actually one of a pair that's seen on St Mary's Church Tower in Brecon. So far, we don't think it's nested there yet. In general, though, they're beginning to use high buildings as nesting spots more often. I guess they're similar to cliffs in the natural environment. The blue-grey upper parts and the brown bars on the chest are quite distinct, and the moustachial streaks on its face separate it, if I could separate it from things like the hobby and the merlin, which are a bit smaller, but don't have this clear mark on it. The Silurian moths were recorded on Hatterall Hill by a team of moth specialists, including Norman Lowe in 2011, after a gap of about 35 years. They were using light traps. The population was confirmed as breeding when larvae were found in April 2012. Since then, much effort has gone into finding them on other places, and the records now on Blorange, Tumper, and along Offers Dyke. It's an upland specialist and only flies around 1 AM onwards, so you can understand it was quite an effort. The caterpillars feed on bilberries, so there may be other areas where it's not been recorded yet. The Welsh clearwing is another special moth for this area. It's quite a large clearwing, and it has 2 yellow bands and a large tail fan. This is orange in the female and light brown in the male. It's found on hillside pastures with scattered birch, open birch woodland and wooded heath, and generally needs to have sun on the trunks. There's populations throughout the UK, so it's possibly under-recorded in Brecon Beacons. It flies in June and July by day, and it can be attracted by specific pheromone lures in sunny weather. The caterpillars feed inside the bark of old birch trees for several years and emerge through a 5mm hole in late summer. They leave a pupal case inside the hole. This distinguishes it from holes made by longhorn beetles, which don't leave the exuvia behind. This is a tree in the Eland Valley where it's known to have lots of clearwing emerging from it. As you can see, it's catching some sunshine there. Bilberries or Wimberries are the UK's only blueberry, with many regional names. I was brought up with it being called whortleberry because my mother came from southwest England, but it's also called blaeberry in Scotland. It's found on acidic moorlands, heaths and bogs, and as an understory in open woodlands. The lantern-shaped flower opens in April and May, and fruits appear in late June onwards. It's threatened by disease, the Phytophthora fungus. The bee that's on these flowers here was taken, it's a bilberry bumblebee. These bees are found on heather-rich areas or areas of grassland which are species rich, and open woodlands. But it's rare to find them away from areas supporting some bilberry. They are a pollen-storing species, and the queens that typically appear in April and the workers from late May. Males and new queens appear from mid-July onwards. They have small nests of around 50 workers, which are usually in old rodent burrows. Purple saxifrage grows on damp, rough and often vertical rock faces or screes, so they're hard to get to and therefore hard to find. It's the only purple saxifrage. It has tiny rosette leaves which look similar to houseleek, but the flowers are much bigger, about the size of a penny each. They flower in April to June. The purple saxifrage is cold loving, and it prefers north facing slopes or higher altitudes. I think it's around 300 to 600 meters in this area, depending on whether it's a north facing slope. We then move on to limestone crags and caves and grassland. This environment is calcium rich with some more acid soils in the hollows. It's much drier due to the water draining through the rock structure of vertical joints and bedding planes. There may also be caves which add another habitat. Oops, hang on, I'm going to go back. In this picture, we've got some rock roses down here. These are lime-loving creeping shrub with yellow flowers. The 5 petals look slightly crinkled and appear in June to September. The small narrow leaves are evergreen. Provides nectar for many species of bees and butterflies and other insects. It's also the food plant for butterflies such as the green hairstreak, brown argus and silver-studded blue. From the records I could see, only the green hairstreak had a few records in the Brecon Beacons, including one near Wetlands Nature Reserve. So this one's the mountain pansy, another lime-loving upland pasture plant. The plants have been recorded in many parts of the Brecon Beacons, but our botany expert said they're often found flowering, so they're not often found flowering. He thinks this might be due to the sheep grazing them off. It flowers in June to August. They can vary in colour. They can be all yellow like this one, or all blue, or mixed, but they always have the cat whisker markings in the middle. This rather colourful assemblage has a mixture of lime-loving plants such as thyme and lady's bedstraw, and also red clover, devil's bit or some scabious there, probably field scabious. And then we've got harebells and betony on the other side. This mixture is quite common in grazed areas, such as Wetlands Nature Reserve. That nature reserve is managed with light grazing with ponies and scrub and bracken control to keep the areas open and the grass short. The autumn gentian is also found in dry calcareous soils. It flowers in July to October, often in groups. It's biennial, so the leaves grow in 1 year and then the flowering spike in the 2nd year. But it's, as you can see, the flowers here have 5 petals again. Waxcap fungi are a globally important group of grassland fungi. They require short crop grassland, so it's managed with grazing. In 2017, a survey of Attlot which is above Craigenos Castle, found 16 species of waxcap and allied grassland species. These species are very colourful, varying from green, yellow, red, orange, pink, white. And allied species include coral fungi and earthworms. This one is a crimson waxcap. With the caves and the limestone areas, we often get bats, and the horseshoe bats are very distinctive for this area, I guess. The left is a greater horseshoe bat. The wings are not completely covering the animal. It's about the size of a pear, and the face is exposed. On the right is the lesser horseshoe bat. Their wings completely surround the animal, so its face is covered. It's about the size of a plum, so there's quite a bit of difference between the two. They both hibernate in caves during the winter, but use roosts in old barns and roofs of buildings for their maternity roosts and nighttime roosts. The lesser horseshoe bat eats midges, caddisfly, lacewings and small beetles, whereas the greater horseshoe bat eats larger moths and beetles. They mainly feed along woodland edges, pastures and wetlands. The Usk Valley contains the largest maternity root population of the lesser horseshoe bats. It's thought to be about 5% of the population, although surveys of some of the winter roosts in caves along the Fangatica escarpment suggests this is an underestimation, which I've witnessed for myself. There may be threats of domestic cats and sparrowhawks which predate on them. The renovation of old buildings and the conversion of some also diminishes their roosting sites, and also the reduction of the insect population through insecticides. The rough patches are characterised by tussocky grass and patches of rush, and sometimes patches of scrub. The curlew is one of the birds that's associated with this kind of environment. It's the largest European wader with a haunting call. It's recognised by its downward curved beak, which it uses to probe down into the mud for prey. It spends its summers on the wet grasslands, farmlands, heaths and moorlands between February and July, and then from July it moves down to the coasts and along the estuaries. The breeding population is thought to be 30% of the Western Europe population, yet the UK has lost 65% of that population since 1970. These losses are possibly due to predation, changing in farm practices. It's now Britain's highest conservation priority bird. I saw a comment earlier about skylarks. The skylarks are like open countryside, upland, moorland to farmland, lowland farmland. Melodious song is characteristic of summer, I feel. And it's sung from either high up in the sky, so this is a common view of what you will see, or from a prominent perch. They're larger than the sparrow, but smaller than a starling. Usually they're not easy to see on the ground, but during lockdown, when I was able to walk up onto Minothickleton Common and just along the road, they seemed to know that people weren't allowed on the grass, and they were running around within about 2 or 3 meters of us. They nest under tussocks, so they are easily disturbed by walkers and by dogs. The chicks are surprisingly independent after only 2 weeks, so it's possible for them to have up to 4 broods in a good summer. Wheatear is also common. It's another bird found up on the uplands, on the commons. This is a male in summer plumage, and the female down here. They're named after the white patch on their rear end. It's a summer visitor and winters in Africa, so it flies south in September, October. Its food are insects and larvae. The brown hare is much larger than a rabbit, with longer legs and a more angular face. It has black tips to its ears. It can run up to 40 miles per hour and will zigzag when evading predators. It favours a mosaic of habitats, including arable fields, grasslands and woodlands. They graze vegetation and the bark of young trees, and they're active generally at night, but forage at dawn and dusk. They don't burrow, they shelter in hollows above the ground, which are called forms. The boxing hares we see in March are usually the females warding off amorous males, not two males boxing. They breed from April to September, and they're 2 to 4 leverets per litter, and possibly up to 4 litters. The leverets are often found on the ground, and people think that they've been abandoned, but they haven't. This is their natural way of surviving. They hunker down in the ground, on the ground. There's been a decline since the 1960s, and again, probably due to farming practices, although there has been a disease that's been notified in Norfolk. So the wet meadows, marshes and bogs, these areas, plants have to be tolerant of low nutrients and wet and often anaerobic soil conditions for much of the year. This is a field showing Devil's Bit scabious. So it favours the no nutrients and acidic damp conditions. The tight pincushion flowers from July to October and are very attractive to many insects, including bees and butterflies. It is a food plant of the marsh fritillary butterfly larva. So go on to that. So this is marsh fritillary butterfly. This is a threatened species throughout Europe and therefore subject of many conservation projects and protection legislation. It's confined to the western side of Britain and it's on the wing from mid-May through to June. The caterpillars can be seen from August onwards, feeding together at the base of Devil's Bit scabious, and they form a web which protects them from predators and also from the weather to some extent. These butterflies or caterpillars also require cutting grass, such as Molinia purple moorgrass, as the caterpillars shelter through the winter within the tussocks. Several apparently small populations in an area will be linked within a larger area. This is called a metapopulation. An example of this is around Ustragon lice to Seven Sisters, where we have 3 reserves and the Butterfly Conservation have another 2 or 3, I think. Although this is outside the Brecon Beacons National Park, there are many records within the park. These populations in smaller areas or smaller colonies tend to have a boom and bust habit, probably due to parasite buildup. So the population increases and so does the parasites. So at some point, the parasites take over and prevent them maturing. Each year though, some of the butterflies will move from this colony and perhaps colonise an area next door or a bit further away. So it appears that the populations move around. They therefore need a much larger area to survive. They're not able to survive long term in one small space. Globe flowers are common, well, used to be common on damp meadows and watersides. They are a member of the buttercup family. There are still quite a few records around the Brecon Beacons, but largely confined now to stream sides and the occasional meadow. The bright yellow globe-shaped flowers are held tightly closed for most of the time. It has palmate leaves. The flowers appear in May and June, and they're pollinated by a specialist fly, which only feeds on globe flowers and also a few micro moths and bumblebees that are strong enough to be able to force themselves between the petals. Management at Cyputh Bow Nature Reserve near Abergwesyn, although outside the park, gives an indication of how to look after them. This includes an annual hay cut and rake off to keep the nutrients low and also prevent the plants getting swamped by rank vegetation. Sphagnum moss is a key species for the formation of peat. There are actually 10 UK species. They form brightly coloured mats in very wet areas. These mats can become raised above the surrounding areas to about 1 metre. An example of this is a raised bog of Darrenkeli. Each plant can store up to 8 times their weight in water, and this stays wet well after the surrounding areas dry out. This prevents the decay of the dead plant material underneath, and gradually this gets compressed over time. To help this environment to continue, we need to control the scrub and stop that encroaching on the bogs. Otherwise, if they would dry out, this can be helped by beneficial grazing. Erosion can be caused by heavy footfall in some areas. The Brecon Beacons National Park project in the Black Mountains has been working to restore some of this habitat. They've been creating dams with jute and sheep's wool to hold back the water. The sphagnum moss has reappeared in some of the wetter areas, and the drier areas have been seeded with the heather brash. Grass snake is found on grasslands and wetlands. It's distinguished by its yellow-black collar. It's a greenish colour, although the picture's a bit brownish, and has a pale belly. The black markings are quite separated and more distinct down the sides. They eat amphibians, fish, and small mammals. It's the UK's only egg-laying snake. The eggs are laid in rotting vegetation, which can be where vegetation is slumped over, or it could be your compost heap. They hatch early in autumn and are often seen basking in the sun near a favourite pond. Like most reptiles, they hibernate October to April, somewhere warm and humid, and the compost heap appears again, but also in rabbit warrens and tree root systems. In 2017, the British and Western European subspecies was actually reclassified as a separate species, Natrix helvetica, which is now separate from the central and eastern snakes of Europe, Natrix. So it's woodland and forestry. The ground's shaded from the sun at least part of the year. In deciduous, this is seasonal when there is leaf cover, which results in carpets of flowers in spring before the leaves grow. In coniferous forestry, they're shaded all the year round, unless of course it's larch, but there's less diverse flora under here. The ground conditions may vary from dry to very wet. The one tree is the sessile oak, or the Welsh oak. It has a more western and upland distribution than pedunculate oak, with higher rainfall. It's often on well-drained soil, well-drained slopes. It can hybridise with the pedunculate oak or English oak, but it is generally a smaller tree. As you can see in this picture, the acorns are not on a long stem, but the leaves do have stems. So the sessile bit is relating to the acorn. In areas where the sessile oaks form a dense single species cover, the ground cover may be bryophytes and mosses. This is an ash tree. It's common throughout the UK, but the Brecon Beacons has many areas of native ash woodland, such as Puthrack Nature Reserve. It can grow to around 45 metres tall with smooth grey bark, although it will fissure as it gets older. This tree has been grown in the open, so it has a much more rounded canopy. The leaves are 3 to 6 pairs of opposite leaflets with a terminal leaflet. They're larger than rowan and have smooth margins. These leaves are late to open and first to fall of all the woodland species. Seeds are single keyed and often retained in bunches on the trees through the winter. As many will know, the ash trees are under threat from ash dieback, which is causing safety issues in many areas. So many trees are having to be felled. We're trying to not to fell all our trees, to give a chance for some that may be resistant to continue. Wild daffodils are obviously the national symbol of Wales, and they're an indicator of ancient woodland. They're found in damp woodlands, fields, grasslands and orchards. They are becoming increasingly rare due to habitat loss and also woodland neglect. They flower in March, so they're just beginning to come out now. They're smaller and more delicate than the garden cultivars. They have a lemony coloured trumpet and cream petals. This photo is of Llandefilog wood. When I was up there a couple of weeks ago, they were just coming into bud. This is also Llandefilog wood. A few months later, in May, it's covered in bluebells. So the UK is the strongest, is a stronghold for the in Western Europe. It holds 50% of the world population of bluebells. Again, it's associated with ancient woodland and forms extensive carpets of blue violet. As I mentioned, they're early flowering from April to May, and the nectar is important to insects and butterflies and bees. The flowering stems droop a little, and the bells are smaller than the Spanish bluebell. The Spanish bluebell is the main threat through hybridisation, but badgers also love to eat the bulbs as they're coming up, but it does give them a bit of an upset stomach. So ramsons favours deciduous woodlands, a more calcareous soil than the others. This is found in Craigaruath Nature Reserve. It's also an ancient woodland indicator. The bunches of small white flowers are on slender stems. The broad leaves smell of garlic. It flowers from April to June. It's hard to pick a particular lichen. So, but probably this one here, it's Ivernia prenustri, it's the oak moss, but it's never found on its own. This branch here has got 3 species on it. So there's Ramalina farinegii and probably a Palmelia species. They are indicators of high rainfall and clean air. So found in the Celtic rainforest of Wales. The smaller pictures are Cladonia species, quite a diverse group. They have fantastic shaped forms. They're generally found on to the ground on rotten wood or near wood. The goshawk is sometimes called the phantom of the forest. Its tail and narrow wings make it really agile at flying through the trees after small mammals, and it can reach up to 40 miles an hour as it does so. But it needs dense woodland to hunt, which gives it an element of surprise as it hunts, and also to nest. It's similar in colouring to a sparrowhawk, but the tail is more rounded, and the female is the size of a buzzard. The white stripe over the eye is quite distinctive as well. Apparently the eyes are yellow on a young bird and redder in an older bird. The best time to see them though is in late winter and spring, when they do a sky dance and display and swoop and plunge in courtship above the woodland. The young are raised in March and June with 2 to 4 eggs per clutch. They seem to be making a bit of a comeback in Wales now. The redstart is a woodland bird recognised with its reddish brown tail. It feeds on insects, especially butterflies and beetle larvae, foraging on broadleaf woodlands and hedgerows by streams. Again, along with the pied flycatcher, which is a black and white bird with a bold patch, white patch on its wing. They travel from Africa in April and then back again in the autumn. So the pied flycatcher will often be seen on a perch and fly out, catch an insect, and then fly back to its perch. You couldn't miss out the hazel dormouse. It's hard to spot, being nocturnal, very rare, and hibernates up to 7 months of the year. It also tends to remain up in the trees, in the branches, seldom coming to the ground. It's found in a variety of habitats, including old managed deciduous woodlands linked by continuous hedgerows, but it can be found in coniferous forests. Its favourite is old coppice woodlands, where it has the young growth from the coppicing of hazel and also the trees providing nuts, older trees providing nuts. Its diet in spring is blossom flowers and hawthorn. In summer, it likes insects such as caterpillars, and in autumn the seeds, nuts and berries. So it puts on fat for the winter hibernation. It therefore needs a variety of species to survive. It makes nests of leaves of hazel and also honeysuckle bark. They hibernate on the ground in tightly woven nests, and when it gets really cold, they enter a state of torpor where the body temperature drops to save energy, and they enter a deep sleep. This leaves them quite vulnerable at times. So the threats are loss of deciduous woodland and lack of management of what's remaining. It's illegal to disturb this animal. Bev who took the photograph, has a dormouse licence, and it was taken as part of a survey. The white letter hairstreak is one of the woodland butterflies. Again, it's very difficult to see because it remains at the treetops. It's not to be confused with a black hairstreak, which has the same colouring, but it has black dots on the orange, and the W is less pronounced. The adults do sometimes come down to nectar on bramble and privet. The caterpillars feed on elm, so there was a population decline after the Dutch elm disease decimated many elm trees. Recent research, though, has shown that it has a preference and better success on wych elm, so let's hope for this species. It also feeds on small-leaved elm. So rivers, ponds, and lakes. Rivers obviously have moving water. Ponds and lakes have little or no flow, so quite different conditions. Right. This is a member of the buttercup family. It has white flowers with yellow centres and floating broad leaves. The flowers appear in April to June and forms mats of slow-moving rivers and ponds and ditches. So it provides shade and also shelter for many species underneath. This is a dipper. It's similar in shape to a wren, but the size of a blackbird with a white bib. And it bobs. You may have seen it bobbing on rocks next to fast-running water. It feeds on insects and water shrimps caught underwater, and it's one of the few birds that can walk and swim underwater, as this video should show. There we go. It seems to look underwater to eye up an insect and then head for it, doesn't it? This was filmed by Peter Davies in Aberystwyth, just on a home trail camera. Sorry, we've got that. There we go. So a grey wagtail has grey upper parts and sort of yellowish underneath, which distinguishes it from the yellow wagtail, which is more yellowy all over. They like fast-flowing water in summer, and in winter are found around farms, lowland streams, and in towns. They eat ants and midges near the water, but also snails and tadpoles found in the shallows. They seem to be expanding their range with improving water quality now. This is the great question. It's the largest newt species, which can be up to 17 centimetres long. Apart from its size, it's distinguished by its warty skin and its orange belly with black spots. The males have a wavy crest along their back. It's a protected species and it's fenced to disturb or kill or capture again. And Steph, who took these photographs, has a license to handle them when she's surveying the sites. They like clean ponds in the breeding season and will breed in March to June, with the females laying around 200 eggs, and each egg is wrapped in a pond leaf. Most of the rest of the year they're out of water hunting invertebrates in hedgerows, tuttocky grass, etc. And they will hibernate in old walls and tree roots. The white-clawed crayfish is so called because the underneath of the claw is much paler. It's the only native crayfish, and it's threatened by invasive species, the signal crayfish, which has brought a disease with it that the white-clawed crayfish are not resistant to. They've actually suffered a decline of 50 to 80% over its European range through habitat degradation and pollution. But there's a few colonies surviving in the Brecon Beacons National Park in the fast-flowing mineral-rich streams. It likes water that's less than 1 metre deep and will hide under stones waiting for its prey of fish, carrion and invertebrates. The otter is also making a bit of a comeback in Wales, quite often seen in the rivers now. They are the largest member of the mustelid family, or the weasel family. They're semi-aquatic and swim low in the water. You'll quite often see their footprints in the mud around where they enter the water. They like riverside vegetation for secluded halts and daytime resting spots, but can travel large distances, and individuals have been known to travel 20 kilometres. They leave spraints, which is this up in the top here, in prominent places. Has a sweet smell, sweet musky smell, and it's used to mark territory and communicate with others. If we could plant up river edges and manage the river edges better, then it might be beneficial to the otter. Also, having tunnels under roads would be helpful too. The water vole is the largest species of vole in the UK and is often mistaken for a rat, but it has much blunter nose. It is ratty in the wind of the willows. It has the fastest decline of any species in the UK due to intensification of farming in the 40s and 50s and the spread of the American mink in the 1980s. It likes well-vegetated, slow-moving rivers and ditches and lakes. They form extensive burrow systems in the bank with different levels and sleeping chamber, and also an underwater entrance so that they have a secure escape route if threatened. They're more active during the day, and their diet is reeds, rushes, sedges and water plants. They often leave a latrine in places, which is this insert, if I can get my mouse over there. So this is a ballpoint pen, giving you the scale, and the latrine is basically trodden down pellets with fresh dung pellets on top. By excluding predators like mink and improving bankside vegetation, it will help their natural spread. But there have been releases in various locations to reinforce populations and also re-establish in suitable locations distant from known populations. So, possible future icons. The red squirrel is nudging in on the edge of the Brecon Beacons National Park in the forest at halfway. They do better in coniferous forests than greys, which prefer the larger fruiting broadleaf trees like oaks and hazel. Greys were introduced and carried squirrel pox, which the reds were not resistant to. The Mid-Wales Squirrel Partnership is controlling greys on the Carmarthenshire Powys border, and the red's beginning to spread a little. Partnership includes the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales and the county councils of Powys, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion, and along with NRW and others. The pine marten has many historical records in the Brecon Beacons, and some of them fairly recent. Could they be hiding on the Epint still? There are reintroductions in 2015 and to 2018 in Mid Wales by Vincent Wildlife Trust, and they've been tracked to have spread as far south as the Congordy region, just north of halfway, but I don't think they've got there yet. Also, there have been reintroductions in 2019 and 2020 in the Forest of Dean, so there's potential spread from the east as well. There's a team of Brecon Beacons National Park volunteers who are monitoring this with camera traps and putting up den boxes. It's thought the lack of potential nesting sites in the Brecon Beacons is one of the reasons holding up progress, but they've been shown to use den boxes very successfully. And most recently, don't know what that's doing. Wild boar have been sighted on the far east of Brecon Beacons as well. Are they making their way in from the Forest of Dean? So it's just a quick map showing the sites, the Wildlife Trust's reserves in the Brecknock area. So this is Pwtherac in this area near Talgarth. Llandefilog Wood is up here, just outside the Brecon Beacons, but characteristic of many others. These are the reserves in Ostrigan Light for the Marsh and Devilwood's Scabious, and Atlwronga and Craigie Ruath are here. And then these are all the reserves in the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales region. So if you'd like more information about the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales, there's this website here, and the Mid Wales Red Squirrel Partnership is there. I think Ben is going to share them on the chats. If you would like to volunteer, you can contact me here. And I know we've got a few volunteers already on tonight. And then if you're from other areas of the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales, then by all means contact through info@welshwildlife.org. And we're more than happy to help you help us manage the wildlife in our nature reserves.